Welcome to the 2021 celebration of the humanities. I'm so glad to be here with you tonight. The past year and a half have challenged communities in many ways. I am inspired by how Rhode Islanders have used the humanities to make connections, to offer perspective, and to build empathy. Our work at the Humanities Council depends on the support of generous donors like you. We are also grateful to our congressional delegation. They are steadfast advocates for robust funding for the National Endowment for the Humanities. Senator Reed, Senator Whitehouse, Congressman Langevin, and Congressman Cicilline, thank you for your leadership and your involvement in the humanities in Rhode Island.
I am pleased to join the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities in recognizing the incredible contribution of this year's honorees. As we continue this long path toward recovery from the pandemic, this celebration of the humanities is an opportunity to reflect on how we honor our shared humanities. Now, let me offer my congratulations to each of tonight's awardees. Onesimo Almeida, Mixed Magic Theater, the Rhode Island COVID-19 Archive, and Becky Davis. Your work has enlightened, educated, entertained, and enriched us all. Thank you.
Hi, I'm so pleased to be able to join the 2021 celebration of the humanities. The pandemic that we are slowly emerging out of has kept us apart, but I know the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities will help bring us back together and rebuild our Rhode Island sense of community and history. Thank you for all your great work, for organizing this event, and for highlighting these immensely talented honorees.
Hi everyone, I'm Congressman Jim Langevin, and I'm so honored to be with you as part of this year's celebration of the humanities. As we all know, Rhode Island's world-class arts and cultural scene is the envy of cities all across the country, and that's a testament to the work of tonight's honorees. 100 years from now, people will know what our lives were like, thanks to tonight's honorees, who are some of the greatest, most inclusive storytellers of our generation, and they're writing history. Congratulations, Dr. Onesimo T. Almeida, Mixed Magic Theater, Rhode Island COVID-19 Archive, and Becky Davis on your achievements. Your work is strengthening our civic engagement and knitting our communities together. Rhode Island is lucky to have you. Congratulations.
I'm delighted to join with the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities in recognizing this year's celebration of the Humanities honorees. I thank you for your extraordinary contributions to Rhode Island and congratulations on your well-deserved honor. As a state and nation, this past year has been a time of incredible challenge. As a community, we experienced an unprecedented public health crisis, and we confronted the realities of racial injustice and economic inequality. Now we look ahead to a time when together we can rebuild a more just and equitable community. Perhaps at no other time in recent history has the role of humanities been more important. That's why I'm so proud to support the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities and honored to recognize this year's awardees. For your tireless efforts preserving and promoting history, culture, civic education, and community engagement, I'm deeply grateful. Your work is a true beacon of hope, especially at this moment when we need it most. Again, congratulations.
Well, there's been so much loss and so many restrictions and so much difficulty that organizations and people faced, and I think that needs to be said at the outset. But what's inspired me is in dealing with that and confronting it, the realities that organizations and people committed to the humanities just did not stop. And there was tremendous resilience and adaptation and ingenuity in a lot of ways. In many ways, I mean, it's been a really busy time at the Humanities Council, and the pandemic has offered opportunities for the council to branch out in some ways. So because of federal recovery funds, we have been able to provide flexible funding, general operating support to organizations all over the state. We will have delivered close to $1 million in flexible funding to state humanities and cultural organizations. The humanities are essential to rebuilding civil society. And as we saw on January 6th, that is very much at stake. And it's the humanities that have enabled people to inquire into history, to make connections, to learn about differences, to have conversations, and to really look at things like, how do we memorialize things? How do we tell the stories of American history? Who's included? I'm excited about how we can contribute to a complex and inclusive and diverse understanding of this very important milestone that the nation is coming up to, the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. So we will be focusing on that over the next year by doing an index of civic health in the state that will include questions about how Rhode Islanders think about that history and how it matters or doesn't matter to them. And I think that that will be a really important contribution to how we commemorate this in a complex way. So one of the things that we've learned during this time is how connected public health is to a wider sense of the common good. In order to protect ourselves, we had to protect each other. In order to protect our community, we had to think beyond ourselves. And I've been really proud of how the humanities have helped to make that real. And at a time when there was a lot of isolation and alienation and fragmentation and polarization, the humanities helped to forge that common ground and make it real, make it visible, make it something that was essential to survival. Thank you to all our sponsors of tonight's event, who you can find listed in the digital program book. We truly appreciate your support and your partnership in ensuring that the Council can deliver on its mission to seed, support, and strengthen the public humanities by and for all Rhode Islanders. Now, I'm so excited to offer you a unique glimpse into the work and impact of this year's honorees, each of whom lead through their creativity, dedication, innovation, and scholarship.
I really feel that it's important for us to be honest with ourselves about the past. And, you know, the past isn't a static thing and it's not a single narrative. And I think that that's what we forget when we look at monuments or when we see and absorb the power of monuments, that they're meant to communicate a particular idea, a certain value. So I'm really interested in finding ways to practice active remembering in a way that leaves space for annotation, for reevaluation, for remaining fluid, and for allowing these narratives to evolve. I feel like when I make work, I typically have something that I want to communicate. Maybe it's research related. So it could be that I uncovered a really interesting sort of nugget that I didn't know in my research, and I want to convey that or communicate that. Or, you know, maybe it's a story that I want to tell about my family. So that's kind of the starting point, but I also acknowledge and understand that everyone is going to bring their own experiences to seeing that art and to interpreting that art. So I try to leave space for that. I try to create pathways not only to communicate a story, but to create a window for a person to examine their own story. In My Living Monument, I tried to do two things. To sort of snub my nose at the politics of public commemoration practices and using humor to do that. But also, other than that very brief little blurb about Burnside, he's largely ignored. The idea is that we take the focus off of him and use his platform to tell the stories of Rhode Island women who were living at the same time as Burnside and doing incredible things, and many of them, most folks don't know their names. The fight against being honest and looking at our history with honesty and integrity, that is a very national story right now, but it's also a very local one. And it's one that's touched my family and the school district that my son just graduated from. I think that it's important to us as folks working in the humanities that this is a responsibility that we hold, not only to keep these stories, to share them, but to continue to ask ourselves questions about what our values are and infusing our educational practices with those values.
Providence Public Library closed on March 13th. We went home, which was, I think, a Friday, with the plan that, like everybody else in the country, sort of what's going to happen. We weren't sure how long we'd be working from home, how long the library would be closed, but it was clear that this was a very strange event. And so I think, probably within a few days of working from home the following week, given my role as curator of Rhode Island collections, started thinking about this is a historic moment and what do we do to document that?
When I first started thinking about this project, it was very much, I would say, from an oral history perspective. When Kate and I started talking, and also when I started talking to other colleagues of mine here at the Historical Society, that was when it sort of expanded beyond just the idea of oral history. And people really said, well, this is not just about oral history and potentially video. This is about photographs. This is about writing. This is about artwork. And we expanded the project so that it would really encompass any digital expression. The traditional role of the archivist, is to sort of ascribe meaning to things, interpret things, sort of obviously place some value, right? What do we save? What do we not save? What do we work hard to make accessible? What gets sort of thrown to the back of the queue, right? And I think very much so, archives are very rightly looking at that and looking at the fact that, well, who are we to make those decisions, right? By doing it kind of in real time, you really get to ask your community, well, what do you think is important?
One of my early favorite contributions that I've gone back to multiple times myself, just as a user of the site, is there's a set of videos by the artist Carrie King. They're based around this idea that she's a tap dancer. It's one of the things that she does. And she was trying to figure out, how can I maintain my tap dancing routines while I'm stuck in an apartment and I have neighbors who live below me who may not appreciate tap dancing.
We really wanted to make sure that we were doing very specific outreach to Latinx communities. And we also knew that the existing project team, were not the people who were equipped to do that. So we applied to the Humanities Council. They had a special program that came through CARES funding. And we hired a woman by the name of Yuseli Mendoza, and Yuseli came on board and was able to just reach all of these people that we weren't able to reach. She was able to really widen the kind of contributions that we had and speak on behalf of our project to people that we just weren't reaching otherwise.
The personal experience of going through something momentous is ultimately what is the humanities, right? It is what is the humanity of the moment. It's not just what are the medical statistics and what's the data that's coming out every day on the governor's site. As important as that is, it doesn't tell you what is it like for somebody who has lost a family member, or what is it like when somebody is scared that they, can't go back to work and their income is, really limited. Or what is it like to navigate getting unemployment when the state is also trying to figure out how to provide unemployment to this many people? I think all of those experiences are really what it is to think about the humanities. What is the humanity of this moment? And that's just what is the lived experience.
There's an artist community, that we embrace, of course, because we are part of it. We're passionate about it. But the greater community, this is where, a lot of the learning come. You cannot exist without being of and participating in the community. You cannot feel, the vibes, the things that are important, that, the ideas, what it takes for change and all of that. How can you commit to doing change in the community if you don't know the community? The magic comes because you get all of these people who otherwise may not have, had any kind of community or connection with each other, but they come into this situation and here you are. You're part of the mix.
The Why It Matters project was very interesting in that in many ways, it just scratched the surface about what the real subject matter was. Because our part of it was to do examinations of 3 Supreme Court cases that have had an impact on American culture and civil rights in this country. So one of the things that we try to do at Mixed Magic is say, how do we connect the dots over a long period of time? How do we do this show, and this show, and they're all connected in some way. They all have a similar theme, or they all carry along a part of the storyline that needs to be told. One of the great responsibilities of the theater is you observe your world. People will tell you things. People will come to you. People sometimes don't even know it themselves, but they're depending on you to tell their story. Because either they don't feel that anyone is listening to them, or they don't have the ability to tell the story themselves.
Mixed Magic is in the life-saving business, and we say that, all the time. So it's a humbling thing, when you hear. I mean, you can speak it, but to see that it actually has that kind of effect on people, and it actually has the ability to change, people, the theater and the reality that it's a life-saving business. I can only say again, it comes back to being just very humbling.
When I came to Brown, I was I remember attending a metaphysics class with a famous professor, very well known, one of the best known philosophers in the United States, Roderick Chisholm. And I used to sometimes leave class and go to a cafe in East Providence. And for me, this was the great experience of the differences in worldview. I was there speaking Portuguese with immigrants about issues that had absolutely nothing to do with the language and the world and the ideas that were going on that I was discussing in class. So it was a Gestalt switch. I would just move in 10 minutes with my bike. I was in East Province. And I got this because of my immigrant experience, because I felt that I was an immigrant. But I felt also that dealing and talking to them and mixing with them, I could sort of broaden their horizons. They would come to my office and ask about solutions, all sorts of problems, where to go and all this. In the beginning, I acted as sort of a referral center. Go here, go there, talk to someone. Yes. So this, very early in my life in the U.S., made me realize in very lively, vivid terms how two worldviews can coexist, pass by, live next door to each other, and don't interact at all. We all have worldviews, and we share worldviews with the communities we are part of, even though we have our own, but we share strong, important elements. And those are quite different from the worldviews of other parts of the world. So I became fascinated by this topic. And I started teaching a course called The Shaping of Worldviews at Brown in 1982. In this course that I teach for seniors at Brown, they come from various departments, and the course is about values. What are the values that one should hold? But in order for us to go over this, we try to understand how do values come about in our lives? How do we end up believing what we believe? And there are many theories about this, and we take a look at some of the prevailing theories. The interesting thing that the students realize is all of them may have a point, but none of them explains it all. So the question is, then what do I do? Then we move from an exercise, a scientific exercise, trying to figure out how things come about, to a different level of question, different kind of question. The question is, then what should I do? How should I act? And this is a totally different level of conversation. It is from it is to what should be. In my case, in many cases, I cannot see the impact, but I can tell you stories. The stories are, I was in the Azores, for instance, and one guy, I was at a restaurant, and a guy came to me and said, you helped me a lot, and you transformed my life. And I said, how? I said, I was at Rhode Island College, and you were at Brown. I was told that you helped people, and I went and asked you what I should do, because I wanted to study mathematics, etc., but I could not afford a better school, and you told me what to do. And then I remembered right away. He had gotten a master's in mathematics from URI, and he went to the Azores, and he taught high school in the Azores his whole life. So these are not quantifiable. You can simply mention stories, or if you have a good collection of them, it means that somehow you did not waste your time or your life.
Welcome to everyone watching at home and to our inspiring honorees. We are gathered here for a vital conversation about the role of the humanities in public life. But first, on behalf of the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, I congratulate Onésimo Almeida on receiving the Honorary Chairs Award for Lifetime Achievement in the Humanities, Mixed Magic Theater, recipient of the Tom Roberts Prize for Creative Achievement in the Humanities, the Rhode Island COVID-19 Archive, a partnership project of the Rhode Island Historical Society and the Providence Public Library, which received the Innovation in the Humanities Award. And Becky Davis, this year's recipient of the Public Humanities Scholar Award. We are excited to recognize your outstanding work and the impact that it has on the cultural lives of Rhode Islanders. As humanities thought leaders, you bring diverse expertise and experience to this conversation, and I'm grateful to be here with you today. So, a note about where we are. We are at the dazzling Wedding Cake House on the west side of Providence. This historic home was built in 1867 and is an impressive example of the Victorian Italianate style. The building has been restored under the direction of the Dirt Palace, a feminist art collective, which has not only saved this storied building, but has made the property accessible as a bed and breakfast, as an artist residency space, and an ever-changing gallery. Now, it's my honor to introduce the moderator of our discussion, Joe Wilson Jr., a scholar, an actor, an activist, and a true friend of the Humanities Council. Joe is a resident actor at Trinity Repertory Company, the founder and producer of America 2, and assistant professor and artist in residence at Wheaton College. He's also the 2019 recipient of the Humanities Council's Public Humanities Scholar Award. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
So good to be here. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Stop it. Stop it. How's everybody doing? Y'all doing okay? Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to all of you who are watching. It is so great to be engaged in this conversation with you today. You know, it's so great to be with you all, and I think that when we think about the humanities, we automatically think about the study of languages. We think about the arts. We think about history. We think about philosophy. But what brings you all together and what makes you all so special for our community is you use those modes, those mediums, and you put those into practice and into action to commemorate, to celebrate, to teach, and to serve as activists. And so it's really great work. And I think that we've all as a collective been in this place of trying to deconstruct a level of mythology around who we are and hopefully getting us to a place of who we want to be. So I want all of you, and this is a conversation, so no more going down this list. Let's just jump in. But like, I want to talk about, talking about narrative, and what have you found has been the thing that, what needs to be unraveled in the narratives that create conditions within the communities you work that are unfavorable to folk? And what are the new narratives, the narratives that we should be interjecting into the public sphere? So deconstructing myth, and what are those narratives that we need to hear more of and celebrate? And maybe it's what you've discovered in your work, because the sort of not reflexive, but the in the moment idea of creating this thing to be in response to. So can we talk about narrative and talk about mythology, and talk about what you do in your work to, what kinds of stories are you trying to put back into the public space? Another way I'll put it, what are those truths that need to be told?
I think Becca talked a little bit about the idea of the sort of myths around whose histories matter and how much time has to pass before it becomes history. Right. I think that's one of the things we've talked a lot about. Our project has sort of brought up, for at least for me, which is that history happens right now. Right. Like this conversation in 5 minutes is history, and that who's telling that story is, we could all tell that story, and our version of it may alter. There may be things in common, and that for people looking in the future back to this moment, what does this conversation tell future folks? It's more robust the more voices you have in the mix, right? There is multiple truths to what that story can tell you, but you can only get at it when you have multiple voices telling the story. And so I think for the COVID Archive project, that idea of it being non-curated as curators, right? That's our job, is to curate what a collection is, and for us to throw that door wide open and say it's what anybody wants to contribute. Makes, ultimately, our goal was for the future, for people who look back on this moment to have lots of different experiences to tell that story.
I think so much of breaking down those myths is also just sometimes making the material accessible to the new storytellers, right? And to make sure that the story is kind of continually being reevaluated and retold in light of what we're learning today, or what we did learn about something in the past, or just that idea of making sure that the number of storytellers and the people who get to tell their stories is continually growing and is as wide an array of voices as possible.
And not being afraid of what those voices have to say.
Absolutely.
And what they say about us.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
This actually, I want to keep going on this idea about what we choose to memorialize and how we commemorate. What are the mistakes that we've made in terms of how we as a country have approached that? I mean, I know it's one way that we've spoken about that is just by not providing space for different voices to be heard. But are there other, can you speak to the dangers of how we memorialize or how we commemorate, or the power of memorialization and commemoration when used for good?
Yeah, I feel like we have this practice of not only commemorating a certain type of a person of a particular sex, of a particular race, of a particular economic status, right? And not only do we center their stories, but we tend to ignore all of the uncomfortable parts of those people that don't fit the narrative, that, you know, this pristine narrative that we construct around them. So I think, in addition, and that's what's so great about this archive, it's the fact that you're giving the power back to the people to tell their own stories, and sort of decentering these education systems where we center, you know, the for lack of a better word, the amateur. You know, we've in the past we've been able to believe anything as long as the right person is telling it to us, right? So I think it's important for us to recognize those practices and point to them and call them out when we see them, and to make space for people outside of those systems to also share their stories, and for us to believe them and to value their narratives, to value what they have to say.
And taking responsibility for, you know, some of the narratives that we can tell, they don't paint a picture of us always being at our best. And it's taking responsibility for that. And I think, especially in a time like now when we're focusing so much on anti-Blackness and grappling with white supremacy, would you all mind speaking a little bit to, you know, I struggle a lot of times because my experience of growing up in New Orleans, my experience of being this complexion versus your complexion, my experience of maybe my hair's a little bit my experience of having the opportunity to go to college, my experience of going to a private high school. My parents were, you know, were poor, but they had the chance because of their experiences to work and build and go back to school. So our experience is so different in the African American community, the African community, and especially here in Providence, which we have a large, both African and African American community. Can you speak to that and help people understand when you talk about, we're not a monolith, that within our community too, we're grappling with divergent stories, points of view, narratives, perspectives. Would you all mind speaking to that a little bit?
I think that's something that should become an automatic way of engaging the community, that you acknowledge that it's not a monolith. But there's an assumption that because you're Black, I mean, like, you understand what's happening with Africa or Haiti or any other person of color, and that it's just so not true. Because the experience, you know, and coming up is just so vastly different. The culture you're coming up in is so vastly different. Now, where it speaks to real time now is that sometimes organizations will hire one person of color, one or two, maybe Latino, and now it's African, Latino and African, and they assume that those two communities know something about the African American community, and they do not. And that does come into play when you're coming to the table, you know, you're making decisions about things. It's like, how can you make a decision about this experience, my experience, where you know nothing about it? I am not represented here. So how do you go about doing that and move forward? And it's so difficult, especially, you know, and I'll say foundations and organizations, when you're going for a grant or something, and you have, you know, that one person that's of color that have no idea who you are, what you do, where you come from, what your culture is. And there's an assumption that because they're of color, they understand your community. Not true. Absolutely not true. That's something needs to be changed now in real time. The representation needs to come from the communities, you know that you're from.
And provide spaces for those additional
to provide those.
That's right, and resources
for those additional, especially resources. Especially in
because to do this kind of work takes more resources. To build that infrastructure takes resources. There is, and how we spend our money is a direct reflection of what we value. Becky, you want to jump in on this?
Oh, yes, I was sorry to interrupt you, Bernadette. I was just going to say that one of my favorite artists once said, "Reality is prismatic," Arthur Jafa. He's a video artist. And I wanted to offer that here because when we think about a prism and rainbows, we understand that the richness of life comes from having a multiplicity of perspectives. I think where we get into trouble is that sometimes we think of truth as being singular. Like there's a singular truth, but there's not. There's a prism, there's a spectrum of truth. each one of us here comes with our own truths. So honoring that and holding space for acceptance of someone else's truth as also truth, I think is key. And absolutely what you were saying, resources are also key. Having multiple perspectives with things like when we're offering resources is also key.
There's a music group that was called Three Truths. There's three truths. Your truth, my truth, and the truth. And the issue is that we'll never get to the truth with capital, but we should look for it because we miss a lot. We will be totally divided if we simply narrate our truths the way we want them. It is important that we have our point of view there, but I think that we should look at, because this is the only way to correct facts, to correct actions, is if we know exactly what happened and what went wrong. So we should not give up the idea of trying to find out what actually was. So we should be very careful with over insistence on, oh, that's all multiple truths. When looking forward, we should, for us to get to move forward, we must look back, and this is why it is important to try to get at what really happened. It is important, even though we will never be able to. That's a goal we must have. Otherwise, we're just going to be talking past each other.
Could I quickly just wrap up to give us a chance to end? This has all been very positive, so I'm not saying. Yeah, I feel invigorated by this conversation. To give you a chance.
Let me just say that someone told me here, I was not writing emails. I was writing notes about your other question that I was spending. I am an academic. I take notes. So I have to say this because this guy is so rude. I know, as a white male, I'm rude and all. Yes, but I'm not writing emails.
I'm so appreciating you.
I have my notes. You want a picture?
Evidence. We want the facts. What's the facts, sir? Yeah. So, in ending, I just want to give us a chance to say, I like to think about my life right now as an artist, but more importantly as an educator, and reflecting back on the first question I asked, and going into this period now, almost 2 years ago. Actually, for me, my downward spiral happened about 6 years ago, if you know what I mean. But, once I got past my despair, I found a lot of opportunity. I found a lot to be grateful for this time. God, yes. Whether that be through, I complained about Zoom, I complained about all the platforms for my university, I complained about the technology, I complained about it all. But what I've realized is that actually, that technology has been a really positive tool for me. It's really allowed me to have more access, it's allowed me to stay a little bit more organized. I've also witnessed the power of technology in terms of the kind of work that we're creating now, the variety of work that we're creating, but more importantly, who can have exposure to that work? And so for me, while COVID has been a time of great loss, I found hope and optimism. And so I'm asking y'all, what are you hopeful about now? What are you hopeful for now?
I am hopeful that the time that COVID has given us to kind of sit back and reflect, because sometimes we didn't have any choice to do anything but I'm hoping that, this whole focus on the injustices and, what's the bad things happening in our world gave us a chance to kind of look out the window and see these things and say, oh my God, that could have been me. And so it's galvanized people, like from all over the world. And I'm hoping, especially in this country, I'm hoping that the positive things that we have made towards injustice and race relations will continue. Oh, there's a lot of ugly stuff that's still going on, but the doors have been opened in a way that you can't say, I don't know anymore. So I hope that continues. I hope that the whole, the wage disparity, that we've experienced in this country, it's never made sense to me that we thought $7 an hour or $10 an hour was enough for someone to live and have, a comfortable life. So those two things for me.
Okay, what else are we hopeful for? And I also want to add in here too is how much this time has forced me to change my pedagogy, change how I approach my work with my students, my own artistry.
Yes.
So I'm just going to throw it out. What are we hopeful for in light of where we've been and where we are?
For me, I'm hopeful about creating space for care, thinking about our neighbors, thinking about one another, opening up pathways to understand that everyone has something that they're struggling with or that they may be dealing with, and to be mindful of that. Also, much like you were saying, it galvanized people and gave people shared purpose. So many organizations and groups sprang up to fight anti-racism in their communities and school districts. And that gives me strength, it gives me hope, and also the hope that those are sustained, those efforts are sustained. Yeah.
I think personally, and also I think what I saw thematically through people's contributions to the archive, is that disruption can be a very energizing thing, right? And it can be really scary. And the sort of question mark that it leads you is like, where does your action take you? And I think it is rooted in what are the values? Like, you have that moment of stillness to say, you know, gosh, how important are my connections with people, literally family members who I'm not seeing in person, or friends who Becca and I knew each other but not well, and literally she was my lifeline multiple days a week through Zoom, right? And so, like, the way that you can build relationships, that might look different, but that interconnectivity is ultimately at the heart of, I think, what is valued by almost, I mean, it doesn't matter where you are in the political spectrum, like your connections to another person are what ultimately matters. And that, I think for me, the value of having to stop my day-to-day and sort of totally create something new to fill my time, whether that was work-wise or personal life. I think I'm hoping to build that I think, in a regular way. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I mean,
No,
I mean, you know, what you were saying about the technology to me has been pretty revelatory, I think, in this moment. I mean, I think about, like, the programs that we do at the Historical Society, where it's like, okay, at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, like, who could come to one of our buildings? Not somebody who had, like, a kid at home, not somebody who didn't live nearby, you know, all of these, there's so many opportunities, I think, now to just get these educational programs, cultural programs, whatever it is we're doing. I mean, even, you know, my annual conference that I go to for moving image archivists, like, you had to work somewhere that could pay to send you to that conference that was last year supposed to be in El Paso, Texas. It was canceled. You know, now it's like, we can go to virtual conferences. There's a lot missing from a virtual conference, and I miss those in-person conferences. And I hope that we land on some sort of a hybrid model in the future. We've learned a lot there that I hope we hold on to.
Great.
Something better about the hybrid model right now is teaching students with their face covered, and I cannot memorize their faces.
Right.
I sent them an email and said, please help an old man, send me a picture of the art. I'm going to print, you did that?
I did.
I'm going to print and write notes when you talk and all this stuff, otherwise, you know, I just can't. I was glad one student this morning sent me an email saying, I do the same. I'm going around taking pictures of people because of classmates, so I memorize their faces. Anyway, so, but in answering your question about hope, I'll say something first about hope. Some time ago I was interviewed by a newspaper, and one thing they picked up a sentence that I said, it's totally unimportant, but they made a headline out of it, and the thing was this: without hope we are doomed. And why it is important? It's important that hope provides us a light ahead of us, and this light should be higher than we can reach. Okay, but should not be utopian. Some people like utopias, like in the 60s. We should have feet on the ground and see what can we do and how far can we go. But we should aim at higher than we can, because if we aim this high, we reach here. If we aim this low, we not even get there. So we have to be balanced with hopes, but it is important. This this provides us a direction, and the belief that hope is not only the hope, but it engages us. It should engage us. I hope that this happens, but I'm going to do my job to make it happen. That's very important. And what things should we hope for? I teach a course at Brown about modernity, values of modernity, and it has a bad rap. The values of modernity are still the ones that we should hold on to. Freedom, justice, equality, democracy, education, progress. These are, the thing is, we want them for everybody, not just for a few. So we should hope that these values that are as whole as mankind, okay, still galvanize us and make us move in their direction, and thinking that we should not be thinking in terms of just one group, but making sure that we sit down and find a way of making them available to everybody. So that's my hope.
Absolutely. My colleagues in the humanities, I can't say how incredibly honored I was to be able to have this conversation with you. I love Providence, I love this community, and you are the epitome of why we all love it so much. That it's not just about hoping, but it's about doing. It's taking the humanities from a space as an intellectual exercise into practice.
I live off.
And there's some great restaurants on hope too. Thank you all so much, and once again, congratulations, and thank you all so much for tuning in and being here with us. And we hope that we can celebrate with you in person next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for spending this evening with us. If you've been inspired by these stories, we hope you'll share this program with those in your circles. And don't forget to check out the online auction. Bidding remains open for another week. Your support and your partnership are vital. Thank you to the co-chairs of tonight's event, Becca Bertrand and Elaine Fain. Thank you also to our tireless event committee volunteers and to the Council's dedicated board and staff. We are so grateful for the opportunity to serve Rhode Island's diverse humanities community and to celebrate the important work of this year's honorees. Thanks for joining us.